The story of humanity is filled with species that came and went, but none were as enduring or as mysterious as Homo erectus. For nearly 2 million years, this remarkable species walked the earth, hunted its prey, tamed fire, and even crossed seas to new lands. They were the longest-lasting human species in history, yet in the end, they vanished. Why did a creature so successful for so long disappear? To answer that, we need to start at the very beginning. The saga begins almost 2.8 million years ago, when the earliest members of the genus Homo emerged. They were fragile, struggling creatures, living among predators far stronger and faster than themselves. Life was short, dangerous, and often brutal. But then something extraordinary happened. Around 1.9 million years ago, a new species appeared, Homo erectus. For the first time in our evolutionary story, there was a human who wasn't simply surviving, he was dominating. This was the species that would reshape the balance between hunter and hunted. Homo erectus was taller, stronger, and more resilient than his predecessors. Some individuals stood as tall as 1.85 meters, towering over earlier hominins. Their bones were thick and dense, built to withstand the shocks of long hunts and clashes with massive animals. This robustness gave them an advantage that few other creatures could match. And their bodies weren't just about brute strength. They were engineered for endurance. Unlike most mammals, they could sweat efficiently, keeping their bodies cool during the heat of the day. With long legs and a frame built for distance, they were the first true marathon runners of the natural world. This unique combination allowed them to use a hunting technique that was as simple as it was devastating: persistence hunting. Imagine a group of Homo erectus tracking a zebra under the blazing African sun. They don't need to outrun it in a sprint. Instead, they pursue it relentlessly for hours, even days. The animal flees, tires, and overheats, while the hunters, cooled by sweat and driven by stamina, keep going. Eventually, the prey collapses from exhaustion, and the hunters move in for the kill. This was the beginning of a revolution in the food chain. Humans were no longer prey, but apex predators. Their dominance was also fueled by intelligence. With an average brain size of more than 1,000 cubic centimeters, around 80% of a modern human brain, Homo erectus had mental abilities far beyond his ancestors. This intelligence was reflected in the tools they left behind. They were the creators of the Acheulean industry, the longest-lasting tool tradition in history. Hand axes, cleavers, and scrapers, carefully shaped on both sides, spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia, lasting for more than 1.8 million years. These weren't crude rocks picked up from the ground. They were deliberate, symmetrical, and effective instruments, showing planning and skill. With them, Homo erectus butchered elephants, horses, rhinos, and even crocodiles. Archaeological sites in Kenya have revealed piles of animal bones, evidence of large-scale hunting and meat processing. For the first time, humans had truly become masters of their environment. But success in the wild wasn't only about hunting. It was also about cooperation. Fossils show that Homo erectus cared for the weak among them. One famous skeleton, known as the Old Man of Dmanisi, had no teeth, yet he lived for years beyond the point when he could chew. His survival means others must have fed him soft foods like marrow or brain tissue. Another child with severe scoliosis lived far longer than expected, supported by the group. These examples suggest that Homo erectus communities looked after each other, laying the foundation for the social bonds that define us today. Then there was fire. Controlling fire changed everything. The earliest evidence of its use by Homo erectus dates back at least 1.5 million years. At first, they probably gathered flames from natural sources, lightning strikes, volcanic eruptions, and kept them alive for weeks or months. Over time, they learned not only to maintain fire, but eventually to create it. Fire gave warmth in cold climates, protection from predators, and light to extend the day. But perhaps its greatest gift was cooked food. By roasting meat and tubers, they unlocked more calories, reduced toxins, and made digestion easier. This extra energy likely fueled their growing brains and bodies. And fire wasn't just practical, it was social. Picture groups of Homo erectus gathering around a campfire at night. Some anthropologists believe these gatherings may have been the birthplace of language itself. Their capacity for communication remains debated. Early studies of the famous Turkana boy skeleton suggested their vocal abilities were limited, but more recent findings show that other individuals had respiratory structures and brain regions comparable to ours. They might not have spoken full languages, but they almost certainly had proto-language. Simple but effective systems of sounds and gestures to coordinate hunts, share knowledge, and strengthen bonds. And with this communication came construction. In Tanzania, archaeologists discovered a circle of volcanic stones dating back 1.7 million years, possibly the remains of one of the first shelters. Later sites revealed evidence of huts made from branches, rocks, and earth. In Germany, 700,000 years ago, Homo erectus built winter camps, complete with fireplaces. This was no longer a species simply wandering the land. They were building homes. Their expansion was extraordinary. From Africa, they spread into Asia and Europe, occupying environments ranging from savannas to forests to frigid plains. Fossils have been found in Indonesia, China, Georgia, and beyond. What's more, evidence suggests they even crossed open seas. Tools and fossils discovered on islands like Flores and Timor, land masses that were never connected to the mainland, imply that Homo erectus built simple rafts and became the world's first sailors. To cross those waters required planning, cooperation, and courage. It also demonstrated something deeper: the ability to imagine what lay beyond the horizon. This imagination, combined with strength and adaptability, explains why Homo erectus thrived for so long. For nearly 2 million years, through shifting climates and changing landscapes, they endured. They outlived almost every other human species by an astonishing margin. For comparison, Homo habilis lasted only about 600,000 years, and even we, Homo sapiens, have only existed for around 300,000 so far. Homo erectus was, in many ways, the greatest survivor in human history. But survival is never permanent. Even the most dominant species can fall. Subscribe if you like the video. As Homo erectus spread across continents, they adapted to astonishingly diverse environments. From the open grasslands of Africa to the dense forests of Southeast Asia, they proved themselves versatile, resilient, and remarkably capable. But their story wasn't just one of survival. It was a saga of innovation, cooperation, and, eventually, mystery. The first thing to understand about their success is their relationship with the natural world. Fossils show that Homo erectus wasn't content with scavenging scraps left behind by other predators. They became hunters who pursued and killed some of the most dangerous animals on the planet. In Kenya, archaeologists found evidence that they hunted not only antelope and deer, but even crocodiles, creatures that once preyed on early humans. In other places, bones of elephants and hippos were discovered alongside Homo erectus tools. Their hunts were not acts of desperation. They were calculated. The stone hand axes they carried were not just tools. They were symbols of dominance. Sharp, symmetrical, and reliable, these tools allowed them to butcher massive carcasses and share the spoils with their communities. And sharing mattered. When a group brought down a large animal, the excess meat was too much for individuals to consume alone. Distribution became part of the culture. It wasn't just about feeding themselves. It was about feeding each other. This practice of sharing created bonds that went beyond necessity. Food distribution meant social contracts, unspoken rules about who contributed, who received, and who cared for the vulnerable. Fossils of toothless elders or injured individuals reveal that these people were supported by their groups, living years longer than they could have on their own. In a world where survival was uncertain, this social safety net was revolutionary. But even revolutions have costs. The reliance on large animals tied Homo erectus to fragile ecosystems. When elephants or giant tortoises declined, so too did the communities that depended on them. Archaeological records show that in places where megafauna disappeared, Homo erectus often vanished soon after. Their adaptability was impressive, but their dependence on certain prey left them vulnerable to environmental shifts. Still, for hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived. One of their most groundbreaking achievements was fire. The ability to control fire not only transformed their diet, but also altered their daily lives. Cooked food provided more energy, fueling their expanding brains. Fire deterred predators and allowed them to inhabit colder climates. Most importantly, it gave them a place to gather, to socialize, and perhaps even to dream. Imagine a camp on the edge of a forest in what is now Europe. The night is cold, and predators prowl beyond the circle of light. Inside, flames crackle as families sit close together. Sparks rise into the sky, and shadows dance across their faces. Stories, perhaps not words as we know them, but gestures, sounds, and proto-language, fill the night air. Around the fire, humans became more than individuals. They became communities. This may have been the spark of something far greater. Some scientists argue that the social spaces created by fire could have accelerated the development of language. A proto-language may have been enough to coordinate hunts and share information, but around the fire, it might have evolved into something deeper, expressions of identity, memory, and imagination. The possibility is haunting. The roots of our own languages may lie in those ancient flames. Their achievements didn't stop at fire. Homo erectus built shelters, some of the earliest in human history. In Tanzania, remnants of stone circles suggest structures that date back nearly 1.7 million years. Later sites in Germany show evidence of huts built around fireplaces, proof that they were capable of constructing homes suited for harsh winters. For a species once vulnerable to the elements, this was a profound step forward. And then came the sea. Fossil and tool discoveries on islands like Flores and Timor prove that Homo erectus managed to cross open water, something no other species had done before. These islands were never connected to the mainland, meaning they required boats or rafts to reach. The implications are staggering. Crossing the sea required planning, cooperation, and imagination. They had to gather materials, build watercraft, and prepare food for the journey. In doing so, they became the world's first sailors, long before Homo sapiens even existed. Such achievements explain why Homo erectus endured for so long. But their story is not without puzzles. Despite their success, their technology stagnated. For nearly 2 million years, they made tools in the Acheulean style, hand axes, cleavers, scrapers, with relatively little change. Compared to later species, who constantly innovated, Homo erectus seemed trapped in a technological loop. Why? One explanation is that they didn't need more. Their tools worked. They allowed them to hunt, butcher, and build. Innovation, after all, often comes from necessity, and for much of their existence, Homo erectus may not have felt pressure to change. But this stability may also have been a weakness. When environments shifted and new challenges arose, their lack of flexibility may have cost them dearly. Another mystery lies in their diversity. Fossils of Homo erectus vary widely across regions. Some were tall and robust, others were smaller and more delicate. Scientists have debated whether these differences represent subspecies or simply regional adaptations. At least 27 variations have been identified, showing that Homo erectus was not a single, uniform population, but a widespread and diverse family of humans. And yet, despite this diversity, their end came. The species that had lasted nearly 2 million years began to vanish. Why? Climate change is one likely culprit. As forests and grasslands shifted, the animals they depended on disappeared. In places like Java, where the last known populations lived, tropical forests replaced open landscapes. The prey they had relied on for generations was gone, and with it, their way of life. But climate alone may not explain it. Around the same time, other human species began to appear. Homo heidelbergensis, Homo floresiensis, and eventually Homo sapiens. Competition may have played a role. These newcomers may have been more adaptable, more innovative, and more capable of surviving in changing conditions. So we are left with questions. Did Homo erectus fall victim to environmental change? Were they outcompeted by their descendants? Or was it a combination of both? The answers remain elusive, hidden in the fragments of bones and tools they left behind. What we do know is that Homo erectus endured longer than any other human species. They were the pioneers, the first to tame fire, the first to cross seas, the first to dominate the landscape as true hunters. And though they are gone, their legacy lives on in us. We are their children, shaped by their triumphs and haunted by their disappearance. The disappearance of Homo erectus remains one of the great enigmas of human evolution. How could a species that thrived for nearly 2 million years, more than 6 times longer than our own species has existed, eventually fade away. To answer this, we must explore not just the facts of their life, but the context of their world and the conflicts that shaped their fate. The last known populations of Homo erectus lived on the island of Java, in Indonesia, around 108,000 years ago. For generations, they had survived in these landscapes, hunting, building shelters, and keeping fires alive. But the world around them was changing fast. Dense tropical forests began to replace the open woodlands and savannas they once relied on. With this transformation came the decline of the large animals that had sustained them for centuries. Without elephants, hippos, and other massive prey, their strategies of hunting and survival began to fail. This shift was more than just an environmental inconvenience. It was an existential crisis. Homo erectus had built its identity and success around endurance hunting, fire, and the Acheulean toolkit. But these skills, so effective in one type of landscape, became far less useful in another. Adapting would have required innovation, experimentation, and new technologies. Yet the very stability that had once made Homo erectus successful, their reliance on tried-and-true methods, may have become their downfall. At the same time, other human species were rising. In Africa and Europe, Homo heidelbergensis and Homo neanderthalensis were emerging. Later, Homo sapiens would take the stage. These species showed signs of faster innovation, more complex social structures, and increasingly sophisticated tools. Where Homo erectus remained tied to its hand axes, its cousins experimented with new blades, spears, and cultural practices. When resources grew scarce, these innovations may have given them the edge. Competition was not always direct. There is no clear evidence of large-scale conflict between Homo erectus and other humans. But competition doesn't require battles. It can happen quietly, in the shadows of survival. Two species chasing the same prey in the same shrinking habitat. One adapting quickly, the other holding on to the past. Slowly, inevitably, one wins while the other fades. Yet, we must not mistake disappearance for failure. In truth, Homo erectus was the most successful human species ever to live. Nearly 2 million years of survival is an achievement no other hominin has matched. They weathered ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and shifting continents. They spread farther than any species before them, from Africa to Asia and Europe, leaving their footprints and tools across 3 continents. They invented fire, built shelters, and crossed seas. Their endurance is a reminder that survival is not always about constant change. It can also be about stability, persistence, and resilience. Still, their extinction raises profound questions. If Homo erectus could last so long, why could they not last forever? The answer may lie in a truth that applies to all life. No species is eternal. Survival depends on balance between innovation and tradition, adaptation and stability. For nearly 2 million years, Homo erectus balanced these forces perfectly. But when the scales tipped, when the world changed too quickly, when competition grew too fierce, the balance was lost. And so, the last members of Homo erectus lived out their days in shrinking refuges, unaware that they were the end of a story millions of years in the making. They vanished quietly, leaving behind bones, tools, and clues scattered across the earth. Their disappearance cleared the way for others, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and eventually us. In a sense, our existence was built upon their absence. But while their species is gone, their legacy is not. Every time we light a fire, build a shelter, or set sail across the ocean, we echo their achievements. They were the first to imagine what lay beyond the horizon, the first to turn darkness into light, the first to transform themselves from prey into predators. Without Homo erectus, there would be no us. And perhaps that is the greatest irony. We ask why they disappeared, but we rarely ask why we remain. Our species, Homo sapiens, has only existed for about 300,000 years, just a fraction of the time Homo erectus endured. Their story is a reminder that survival is fragile. Dominance today does not guarantee survival tomorrow. So when we look at their fossils, their thick bones, their ancient tools, their footprints frozen in mud, we are not just looking at a vanished species. We are looking at ourselves, at what we were, at what we could still become, and at what we might one day lose. The story of Homo erectus is not just a tale of extinction. It is a mirror, reflecting the precarious balance of survival, innovation, and fate that defines every species, including our own. They walked the Earth for nearly 2 million years. They conquered landscapes, crossed oceans, and endured hardships we can hardly imagine. And yet, in the end, they disappeared. The question is not only why Homo erectus vanished. The question is, how long will Homo sapiens last before we, too, face the same destiny? Subscribe if you enjoyed the video.